What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 58 of the Halving Report podcast with myself, your host, Brad Mines. The price of Bitcoin has bounced back to 44,000 US dollars, and there are 875 days left until the next Bitcoin halving. Today, we welcome Mark Eglinton to the show. Mark is a Scottish best-selling author and co-writer who recently released No Domain, the John McAfee tapes. As many of you know, John McAfee allegedly committed suicide on June 23rd, 2021, after authorities confirmed his extradition to the United States of America. John had chosen to give his account of his life to Mark through a series of Skype conversations in this hush-hush autobiography. John was obsessed with cryptocurrency and was a known legend in the hacker community, having founded McAfee Associates. So let's get to it. Hey Mark, thanks for coming on to the Halving Report podcast.
You got it. Very, very pleased to be here.
Yes, much appreciated. I'm very envious of you. You got to speak to Mr. McAfee there for quite a while, some intimate conversations as I just finished your copy of book, No Domain, the John McAfee tapes. But I just wanted to, if you mind giving us a bit of a background for yourself, introduction, just for those that may not be familiar with your work and maybe a little bit about your past notable works.
Sure. I mean, my background is primarily as a ghostwriter, which is one of these monikers that's quite hard to explain to people because it kind of gets denigrated a little bit. I think it's the idea that someone, whether they be a musician, a computer programmer, a sports person, hasn't written their own book. And basically what I do is deal with people of that kind in all walks of life and help them write their autobiography, because whether it be they don't have time, they don't have the expertise, there's lots of different reasons why people don't write their own book and engage someone like me. So that's what I do. And up until this point, for the last 12 or so years, I've been doing that with musicians, sports figures, business types, and really anyone who's got an interesting story to tell. And that's where sort of John came up for me. And this is something I do. I don't mind, I get some approaches through agents and through publishers and people directly contact me, but I don't mind going out finding people and saying, how about doing something? And that's what I did with John. And, always worth taking a chance. I'm someone who will take a chance with anything and send out that message and hope something comes back. And with him, that's exactly what did happen. And I think the first message came back September 2019. So that kind of brings us to where we start the process with John McAfee.
And so John McAfee, with his troubles with government organizations, his exaggerated promotions of cryptocurrencies, what made you still want to work with him?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not somebody who particularly judges clients that I work with, and that's not to say that I don't have sort of a moral compass. I definitely do. But ultimately, we're looking at what's a good story and what isn't. And I wouldn't say I knew everything about what John had, all the details of the troubles John had got into. I definitely followed the story pretty closely in Belize in 2012, because, I mean, the point is, who couldn't follow it? It was all over the news. It was everywhere. And I just couldn't get my head around the fact that this was the same guy that had founded McAfee antivirus, and now had become basically what seemed like an alter ego. I couldn't believe this was the same guy, and I just thought this is the craziest life ever lived. And I didn't even know the full extent of it at that point. And I thought, this just has to be a book here. And really, I couldn't believe he hadn't done it himself. I mean, I really went on Amazon and sort of Googled John McAfee autobiography. I thought there has to be one. And when there wasn't, I thought, here's a great opening.
And so when did it become public that you were working on John's autobiography?
It never did. And that was his doing as much as it was mine. I mean, I don't mind being reasonably public about who I'm working with, but I only usually do that when it becomes quite concrete in terms, and I mean that from the perspective of that it's going to be published. And John being what he's like, or definitely what he was like at that point, just to explain to anyone who doesn't know, John was in hiding at this point. He wasn't out there broadcasting what he was doing very readily on a sort of business level. So we kept it pretty quiet. And it's a good thing that we did, because there was a lot of complication that would happen down the line from a business perspective between him and I. I mean, the creative part of it was the easy bit. The tough part was trying to sort of navigate this guy to something sort of conventional, like a publishing deal. So we never went public about it. He told me to say nothing and just get the process done. So that's what I did.
Now, you mentioned here today, and you mentioned in the book as well, that, you messaged him, and I think he got back to you in 2019. And I know you said you followed him, the Belize story, but like, when did you really start paying attention to John McAfee's life and following what was going on there?
I mean, I knew about McAfee going back to the antivirus days, but these weren't internet days, and in that era, and it was really just what you were willing to read in the papers and all this kind of thing. I'd sort of distantly followed it, but I'd say Belize was when it really got interesting, and from that point onwards, I read everything there was to read about John. And a lot of it, what happened in the US, and it's one of the eras that's most interesting to me, and also one of the eras that is most confusing, is the period between when he came back from Belize and went on the run. I mean, I won't spoil the book by telling people some of the things that happened, but that was such a bizarre era, and that coincided with quite a lot of publicity with John. I mean, he was doing stuff like appearing at hacker conventions, DEF CON, and all of that. And, this was John. I mean, John liked to magnify his own situation. Nobody liked more to promote their own plight than John McAfee. Now, whether that plight was a good thing or whether it was a bad thing didn't really matter to John. I always got the impression that John thought that old maxim of any publicity is good publicity was something that he wanted to go with, and he generally did. So, I mean, I was on board from 2012 onwards, and by the time he was on the run in 2019 and stuff, I was all in on this story, and I had no idea where it would end. I don't think any of us did.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned he likes to, focus in it and kind of make a situation out of his own life there, and I mean, like, he's lived. There's no doubt he's lived an absolutely extraordinary life that I don't think anybody could ever topple. But that time in 2019, or when, I'm not sure exact timeline, but when he was in the States, and it did seem like a weird little era there, because he was supposedly on the run prior to that, but then he's back in America. But you just kind of take his word on what he knows, what's going on in the background. He talks about having connections with people in the CIA who are giving him information of what's going on. And then there was a grand jury being formed. It was certainly an interesting time. And in the beginning, I would say, like, the first half of the book, I would say for me, it seemed a little bit like everything seemed pretty genuine and very easy to believe. And it's in the later years, when there's just so much happening and so many different names and different people coming into his life, it's almost hard to keep straight. So, I mean, no, and that's why I appreciate you coming on here and kind of just clarifying some of these things. I'm sure we'll have some overlap later in the episode, but certainly just an interesting area. I just kind of wanted to point that out. And but I kind of want to relate with cryptocurrency a little bit, because I do focus here on Bitcoin and crypto for the most part. And John's was, of course, obsessed with cryptocurrency, and you mentioned many times in the book how he was so adamant about the use of cryptocurrency. So, what kind of transactions were made there for the book, or what transactions needed to happen, and why was that? Why did he insist on the use of cryptocurrency?
Yeah, well, I mean, this was part of it, because we never actually discussed our financial arrangement, and this is all part of John as well, because, I mean, normally working with anyone, I'd go into a situation with a collaboration agreement, and collaboration agreement really just spells out, what do I expect from you, what do you expect from me, what happens if it goes wrong, that kind of stuff. And it's usually a one-pager, and it's great. And I think realistically, is it worth the paper it's written on? Probably not. Is anyone going to enforce it? Possibly not either. But with John, we didn't even bother with that, because it was clear to me that this wasn't somebody. I mean, he even said it himself. He said, I've got 170 lawsuits out against me. Are you going to come after me if I don't do what you ask? I said, no. And I said, well, equally, are you going to come after me if I don't do what I'm meant to do? And he said, absolutely not. So right from the beginning, there was I wouldn't say sketchy. It wasn't sketchy. It was just relaxed. I mean, there was no point in formalizing anything, and that spread into the sort of financial arrangement of getting a publisher deal. Now, just to explain to people who don't understand how that works, normally there's a proposal written, which is a sort of overview of the project, maybe a sample chapter. Then you take it out to publishers. And that's what we did. And this was as John McAfee's autobiography. We were pitching it as that, and we're getting very enthusiastic responses. Now, at that point, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to work well, until it got to the point where we got a contract, or we got the offer of a contract, and the publisher said, okay, so how do we pay? And I went back to John and said, all right, we need to separate we'd agreed already he would take 65% of the proceeds and I'd take 35. That would be normal. That was quite generous. And I said, okay, how do we do this? And he said, well, only payment in crypto. And I said, this is going to be a real problem. And let's forget what we think about whether businesses like publishers should be contracting in crypto at this point. I think they should be, but in 2019 they weren't. And I mean, half of them didn't even know what crypto was, far less whether it was something that they could do a publishing deal with. So I said to John, listen, we're going to have a problem here because they're just not going to do it. And I said, furthermore, I don't know where you are. They don't know where you are. If you honestly think a publisher is going to draft a contract and just toss it out into the abyss and hope that someone's going to sign it and that they can enforce it, it's just not going to happen. We're speaking in different languages with these companies. And he got quite aggressive about it and said, well, fuck them. If they can't conduct business in DAI or whatever it is, Bitcoin, an absolute stretch, I don't want to work with them. So you're in that position that you're going back to the publisher saying, great, great that you want to offer, but unless you can pay us in cryptocurrency of some kind, this deal doesn't happen. So the deal didn't happen. And from that point onwards, I realized that John was extremely rigid in a number of things. One of them was his insistence on crypto at all times. The other was communication. The only way John and I ever communicated, other than the initial Twitter messages, was Skype direct message. Don't know why. Said he didn't have a phone, but had cell phones when I was speaking to him on Skype on the table or whatever. What they were doing, I have no idea. Did sort of occasional email, certainly no direct messaging on anything other than Skype. So what I'm getting at with all of this was it was very clear that there were a number of parameters in place right at the beginning. And one of them was crypto. And, I have to qualify all of this by saying that I'm not actually that conversant in crypto, or I certainly wasn't then, because he decided to pay me for my proposal that I was writing, or we agreed that he would pay me. That would be normal as well. Just working capital to be sort of living off while I'm doing it. And it was an absolute ordeal getting it because it would only be in DAI, which I then had to change to Bitcoin, which I then had to cash out to dollars. And it was just a nightmare. And you're talking to a guy who was 50 years old. I'm not saying I'm an idiot or a Luddite. I mean, I do understand technology, but I didn't have a Coinbase account or anything. So I had to start all this from scratch. I was fucking trying to navigate all this stuff, worrying about forgetting passwords, having no idea whatsoever what a good exchange rate was. I literally just kind of tossed the Bitcoin I changed the DAI into the wind and said, well, whatever I get for this, I get for it. Right? So, and bear in mind, this was at a point where I really try not to think about what Bitcoin was worth when he gave it to me versus what it became. That is just head wrecking because, it might have been, I don't know, you'll know, what was it worth in 2019?
Oh yeah, I mean we were the bottom in the bear market was a little bit over $3,000. So
yeah, and it went to
dollars,
60.
Yeah, 69 US. Yeah, pretty much 70K US. And I think it's pumping a little bit this morning. We're over 43. So
so I was in this situation where I'm not saying I gave the money away, but I just wanted the cash. And, if I'd sat in it for a few months or a couple of years, I could have bought a house, basically. that's the reality of it. And I think that's a lesson to anyone who doesn't understand crypto. Unless you know that world, you don't know what you're doing. So I didn't know what I was doing, but I did know that John, and this is where one of the articles that was written in the aftermath of the book became quite significant. And I was interviewed by the Daily Mail, and they said to me, what do you think John's financial position was? And I said, I think he's broke. I was convinced he was broke. And the reason I think that was because he could barely scratch together. And I don't need to say how much it was, but it wasn't very much that he paid me. He could barely scratch that together in DAI. Now, I know that there's time constraints in getting that stuff. I get the whole sort of mining thing without sounding like a complete normie saying that, but, I get it. But I just felt it was a real struggle for him. And any suggestion that he had all this crypto lying around that he had access to, I think was mythology. And I think it was mythology created by him. I do. I think he was absolutely the bottom of the barrel at that point.
Really? That's interesting. I've had some clues that kind of point that he did have crypto lying around. So that's certainly interesting. Now, why do you think John had chosen you? I mean, the guy has a million followers on Twitter still to this day. And, so many people that were reaching out to him on a daily basis. I'm sure, why do you think John chose to work with you? And do you think he was working with anyone else at the same time?
That's quite a fun conversation because I know he'd worked with two other people. And I think one of them was quite well publicized. Don't know who the other one was. He basically trashed those pretty early on. And he also trashed me quite early on because I remember he said to me, tell me something about yourself. Give me something to suggest what you're all about. So at that time, the weekend before, there'd been an article written by a Scottish sort of mainstream newspaper about me, which was cool. And it tied in, I used to caddy professionally in a sort of middle part of my career on the old course here in St Andrews. And they wrote this piece, sort of rock and roll and caddying stuff, because I've written with musicians. They wrote this article, which I sent to him. And he came back to me and said, I don't give a fuck what anyone else thinks about you. I want to know what your writing's all about. So I was like, whoa, okay, this guy's going to be tough. But he was right, to be fair, because I was just thinking, this is quite easy. I can just send him this and he'll buy it. And he didn't buy it. So he said, send me a couple of links to your work. So I sent him a PDF for a book I'd written in the past with a musician, a guy called Rex Brown from Pantera. And I sent that specifically because that story was quite gritty. It was very much written in voice, which was a Texan musician who was kind of down and dirty, and it was a bit rough around the edges, but it was really, really sort of direct and punchy. And I sent it to John because I thought that might be how he wants to do it. So I sent him this, thinking, God knows what he might say. I mean, after that first thing, I was like, well, I'm kind of cowering behind the sofa here, waiting to see what he says. He came back to me and said, bro, you're the one. You are the one. I was like, okay. He said, I love your style of writing. I think you'll understand me. I think you've got maturity. Then he went off on some tangent and said, all the other guys just couldn't believe some of the stuff that I was telling them. And at this point, I didn't know what he was telling them. He said, these guys were saying, but how could that possibly happen, when he was relating some of the events of his life? And he just thought they were naive. So I said, oh, well, okay. Well, little did I know, I'd be thinking the same thing in a few months' time. But it was enough to get his confidence. I think it's part of John that appealed to him that I was British, and I should explain, my wife's American. I've spent a lot of time in the US as well. It's not like I'm British. I know both. And I think that resonated with him because he's the same, as people may or not know. John was born in England, had 2 passports, albeit he lived his entire life in the US. So I think that appealed to him. And I just think, someone's asked me this before, did he like me as a person? Yeah, I think he probably did. I think, I saw him as an almost sort of father figure quite quickly. And that's not to denigrate my own father, who has passed away many years ago, but my father didn't impart the kind of wisdom on me that John McAfee did. Let's put it that way, because my father didn't live the kind of life John did. And I think John saw that. And I think John quite liked to have this person that he could relate to on that level. So I think, a long-winded way of answering your question, I think the relationship was pretty steady from that perspective right from the beginning. Once we kind of eyeballed each other and he realized what kind of guy I was, I think he was all in. And I genuinely don't think he was working with anyone else. I know he was doing other things. I think he was talking to people for documentaries and that kind of stuff. In fact, I know he was, and doing interviews and all that kind of stuff. But as far as the book was concerned, this was his focus. And he very much wanted to make this his kind of definitive story. He told me that many times, you know. Not to suggest that what he'd said in the past was wrong, but I think, you know, he was 75 years old. Let's put it down on paper what my life was all about, specifically the early parts.
On my show, I talk a lot about, or ask people a lot, like how they got into cryptocurrency. And I can say, you know, getting paid from John McAfee to do his autobiography is probably one of the coolest stories. It's up there. It's definitely up there. So I'll tip my hat to that.
Yeah.
One interesting thing, or I guess many interesting parts of the McAfee story, was how many things he's built along the way and started that I just wasn't aware of. He's written, I think it was 4 yoga books, it said, which, you know, I was looking up on Amazon. You can see them, you can still purchase them. And he's also started the boat taxi. Was that in Belize?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, have you ever gone, or, you know, wanted to go and see maybe some of these things that he's claimed to have built from scratch, or whether he just bought them up and conglomerate? I know he's built condo buildings and gorgeous houses all over the world, allegedly. Have you ever seen any of them, or would you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite funny. The one in Colorado, which was the first sort of, I wouldn't say ridiculous house, but I mean, ridiculous by sort of normal standards. Can't remember how many square feet it is. It's tens of thousands. Anyway, he was very keen to show me pictures of this place. He'd like send me links and say, look at this place. This is the bit I did with this kind of sandstone and all that kind of stuff. I totally get it. It was impressive. And that's really the only one I did look at. I mean, all the others exist. I mean, you can go online and look into all these other properties. And you're right. He did build houses in New Mexico and Texas, and 2 in Hawaii, I think, 1 in Ecuador, which was just kind of head spinning, and it just made no sense. In fact, none of them made any sense. And in fact, he knew none of them made any sense. And that was part of the appeal for me, was that he was quite willing to do all this stuff, you know, and spend a lot of time sourcing, you know, rare gateposts from Japan, and, you know, furnishings and fabrics from all over the place for houses that I mean, in some instances, I don't think he spent more than 2 nights in. And, you know, I think that goes back to the kind of personality that John is. John was somebody who liked to create, and I don't think the sort of ownership of that creation thereafter was very important to him, to the extent that he was willing to walk away from it. I think he compared it to sculpture. I asked him and said, why'd you do this? It's crazy. Anyone looking at you would say you're insane. He said, it's just like sculpture. You know, you spend months or years on this project, you make something that looks wonderful, then that's it. You're going to do something else. So yeah, I'm interested. And, you know, I haven't had enough time since the whole thing kind of passed with COVID and everything. But next time I'm in the States, I do plan to go down there and have a look at some of these places and try and find them and try and kind of piece this story together a little bit. I don't doubt they exist. I know they exist, but I would like to actually see them just to get a sense of what he was thinking.
Now, a big mystery around McAfee is his children and how many he has. Are there any of his children that have public profiles? Like, how verifiable is this?
The only one I've been in touch with is his daughter from his first marriage. And she claims to be the only blood relative, and she's entitled to claim that. I don't want to go into that too much because it's not been that satisfactory an interaction for obvious reasons. And, you know, listen, I'm very sympathetic to her situation because, you know, having a father like John McAfee can't be easy for any child. I get that. And, you know, I wonder whether she was maybe looking for some solace from the book in terms of how he felt about his relationship with her in it. You know, and sadly, that just isn't there. As much as I tried to kind of get that out of him, I tried to push him on that and say, you know, you've helped sort of random people all over the world, and, you know, you help people, but you don't seem to do much for your own children. And his answer to that was, well, that my own children aren't in poverty. Now, yes, that's true, but that doesn't sort of mean that you don't have to have a relationship with your own daughter. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of it. I've got sort of two sides of the story. Out of respect to John's daughter, I would probably leave that one alone. As far as other kids, let me just put on record, it was never me that said John had 47 kids. that was John. That was his admission. And I remember I pushed him on it and said, okay, what's the story with this? And he kind of deconstructed it a little bit by saying, as you might notice having read the book, said, well, some of them couldn't be possible because I didn't meet that woman at such and such a time. And a few others probably didn't have sex with them and all this kind of thing. And he kind of boiled it down to, well, there might be less than 47, but we never actually got to a number that it might be, could be 15, which is a lot of kids by anyone's standards, but it isn't 47. So I think that's something that's going to be a mystery. Have I heard from anyone else who claims to be his son or daughter? I haven't. Have I got any knowledge of anyone coming forward to contest, inheritance or whatnot? I have some contact with John's lawyers. It's not anything I've heard of. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't exist. It just means that nobody's come forward at this point. And in fact, even John's daughter is very private, doesn't want to be in the public profile any more than she has to be. And she has been a little bit. I've got no issue with her. She's got issues with some of the aspects of the book. And listen, I understand that.
Fair enough. And I mean, you can only write down what you're getting from your end, right? Whatever is input to you.
Yeah.
Now, another interesting aspect of the book and just following John's life was the dead man switch. To this day, has anything ever gone off, or has there been anything that's ever happened since the passing of McAfee?
No. And indeed, in the many hours of conversations that John and I had, at no point did he ever mention a dead man switch. And I totally appreciate how disappointing that is for people. It was never mentioned, either by words or by concept. Now, John did, as you know, talk about CIA agents that he knew, talked about CIA agents that he outed publicly, and there was one whose name I didn't bother putting it in the book because it's out there on the internet, outed him in the Bahamas for a sort of, I think it was an entrapment situation with a police official in Bahamas to pick up John. The name's out there. I didn't bother adding it. It wasn't necessary. Beyond that, I don't really think anything or even any allusion to having information on important people, the Clintons people talk about, Epstein, all this kind of stuff. That was something we never discussed. Now, I've been asked before why we never discussed it. And it's not that it's an insignificant part of McAfee, but I like to think, or I've said before, that the conversations that John and I had were about John McAfee, the man. And there's a lot of delicate stuff in there, his feelings, his sort of philosophy, all that kind of stuff. The stuff about the dead man switch, and to a lesser extent, crypto, and the bath salts and the pooping through hammocks and all that stuff. That's sort of McAfee, the meme. Now, I'm not saying none of that happened. But I'm just saying it was kind of two different dimensions of the same life. And while we did touch on bits and pieces of drugs and, talked a lot about sex, dead man switch never came on the radar. And, the Q thing, I may as well tell you because you probably asked me, the Q thing appearing on the Instagram account, I didn't pay any attention to that when it happened. I just kind of shrugged and said, yeah, well, okay. And the reason I didn't was because John told me he'd never once logged into his Instagram account. And this was completely unrelated conversation. It wasn't like I was teeing him up for this, because obviously I didn't know it was going to happen, but he was talking about social media and all that. He just never logged into it. Now, that's not to say that someone else couldn't have logged into it, etc. Who knows? But I thought it was a nothing. And I don't know much about the Telegram account. Everyone who wants to talk to me about the Telegram account, which I don't know when it appeared. You might know. I think it was pretty soon after he died, and just started churning out stuff. Some of it that I've seen before, apparently, because people sent me screenshots of bits, and I was like, yeah, we've seen that before. It didn't seem to be anything particularly new. I didn't pay any attention to that either. So again, in summary, I don't think there's anything. I really don't. And again, really, really guttingly disappointing for people who were hoping there'd be a big reveal. I just don't think it's there.
Yeah, that's fair. And I can even say part of myself wanted to see something there as well, but I didn't really go. I was like you. I saw the queue on Instagram. I knew John was only active on Twitter.
Yep.
And I just didn't seem anything was verifiable, and people were just running with it. Like, I think I saw someone said a condo in Miami was blown up that had all McAfee's information. Like, they were just things were just popping out of everywhere, and it just didn't seem verifiable. So I didn't feel like it was worth my time looking into either.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the condo thing in Florida. I mean, first of all, the tweet about a condo in Florida by John is a fake tweet.
Mm-hmm.
So you're off to a bad start with that.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
As soon as you go down that path, I think you're struggling. And I just didn't buy into it. What I would say though, and this is something that's always interested me about John and his sort of life, is that there are a lot of people who orbit John. There always have been a lot of people who orbit John in lots of different capacities. Now, that could be, the crypto world, the presidential campaign world, just various sort of elements that he sort of attracted. I don't want to be disrespectful and call these people hangers on, but he did attract a lot of sort of just extra people. And they'd come into his life as bodyguards, they'd come in as campaign managers, they'd come in as this and that. And I think when you live a life like that, and I think John liked that because, it focused the attention on him. I think when you do that, I think you run the risk of giving people access to your stuff that one day might be used against you. Now, not for me to say that someone found the Instagram password and thought, this would be fun. Let's do this. But who knows? I mean, it's the only explanation I can think of because, well, on two counts. One, John's dead. And two, I know he never accessed Instagram. So I think it's important to kind of deconstruct these things and not get sucked into the excitement. And there has been a lot of excitement. You can see it building. Oh, McAfee's going to bring them down. He's got all this shit and that on this person and that person. And I think that's great. And I think every part of us wants that to be true. I mean, who wouldn't like to see people getting brought down that need brought down, as you said? But I think you got to look at the facts and not the hype. And I think 95% of it was hype.
Yeah. Well, I think so, yeah, sometimes McAfee would kind of hint at some of these things too, which would get people going, right? Like get some of his more hardcore fans and like you said, the people that are hoping to bring down some corruption. Obviously everyone wants to see that at the end of the day. There's parts of the story where he's digging things up that he's buried in the past. Are there buried treasure? Are there buried John McAfee treasures out there left to be found that you know of?
I think so.
Yeah.
I actually think this was true. I love this story. Not to the extent that I was willing to accept that it was true. I just thought this is the kind of stuff I love. I mean, who doesn't love the idea that there's a guy driving around the Southwest in a Hummer, unearthing watches and piles of dollars and stuff like that. I thought it was so great. And knowing what John's like, John's someone who likes to have a backup plan, whether it be having access to money to go out of Guatemala or whatever it was. There's always plan B with John until there isn't. And I think that was plan B. And at that time, I think he was quite calm-mindedly protecting his position before he went to Belize by making sure that if things turned to shit, which they inevitably do in his life, he's going to have some backup when he came back. Now, I remember asking him, at one point we got into a conversation about a Bentley. And I think it was around the time that we were talking about how he was going to pay me. And I think you know where my head's going with this, but I think I said, well, maybe you could give me that Bentley then, type of thing. And this thing was apparently parked in Miami outside some condo, not the condo that fell down, but it was in Miami or something like this. And I got the impression from that there was a number of things scattered around the country still that he was sort of kicking himself thinking, damn, I'll never get back for that. And I did ask about the locations of some of the sort of tranches of treasure, whatever it was. And it was always you'd never find it. You know, I was, obviously he's not going to tell me, but because at that time you have to remember, he didn't know he wasn't ever coming back to the States. I mean, and I'm sure there was part of him that thought, well, okay, maybe this will get resolved. And that's part of the story here. All our conversations we were having during this time were not against a backdrop that he was going to be dead. They were against a backdrop that maybe the legal case would be won, maybe he'd escape. I mean, we just didn't know. So I think in his mind, he was like, well, maybe I won't be in this position for the rest of my life and I will go back. But I did try and grill him a couple of times. He was saying, well, you'd need to see the light at a certain time of day reflecting off this leaf in order for it to shoot a ray of light onto the ground at this point. And that is real Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff, you know, and you would see the point in the ground where I buried this. So I quickly realized that he was never going to tell me, but I do think there probably is still some stuff out there.
Can I ask you about the book cover, its inspiration in Illustrator?
Yeah. It's really tough to come across book covers that work. And what I find quite depressing, and it's not a reflection on the publisher or any other publisher, but what they normally do is, you know, they default to Getty Images or one of these agency type places, where you can go online, you can see stock images that have been sold by photographers or whatever. Now, there were some decent ones out there, but most of them had been seen before. You know, images from jail and Belize, that kind of thing, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, all that stuff, been done before. And I didn't want to do that. So I remember trawling around the internet, you know, literally just sort of image searching, came across this image, which is a version of the image that's on the cover. At that time, it was in black, and it was found out it was designed by a guy called a lot of money. Now,
I'm familiar.
Yeah, I didn't know a lot. I didn't know him. I mean, I'm not going to say his name because he may not have it public. But what I do understand about him is he's in France. He's a designer. He met John on one occasion, I think. Really cool guy. Seemed to be really laid back. And we looked at this image and thought, this kind of captures something. This is McAfee sitting on like a throne. You know, obviously the Game of Thrones image was there, but that wasn't really the aim. But there was certain elements there. There was a bottle, there was guns. He had his hand down his pants. There was a few things about that image that really appealed. And I remember thinking, let's do something different here. So I said to the publisher, listen, why don't we try and buy the rights off this guy? And they said, well, okay. So they contacted him and he was very happy to be part of it because, you know, your image is immortalized forever on a book cover. And he said, I'm going to frame one of these and all that. That was great. So we did that. And the color, I have to say, it's really gonzo. And I don't have a problem with gonzo and garish. I wasn't sure about it at the beginning. I was like, I don't know about this because I think in my head, I saw this as a serious book. And you know, there's aspects of it that are serious. So I think I wanted something a bit less sort of comic book. Anyway, they mocked up some examples, came up with this cover. And I thought, actually, this actually does work because it's kind of it's larger than life. It's over the top. I just thought, this is kind of life the guy led. You know, people are going to remember it. It's, you know, the black was great, but the black was understated. The pink and purples and the sort of garish, almost comic book style, I grew to like, and I'm still glad that's what we went with, and I'm very glad that we went with somebody who's a sort of guerrilla artist. I think he's involved in NFTs and stuff like that, and you know, again, I don't know what all that stuff is, but I know that he's good at it. So I think it was appropriate that it was somebody like that who did the cover.
Absolutely, and like I said, I'm familiar with him on Twitter and have seen some of his work, and it's absolutely amazing. And from what I get to, he's pretty busy in his work, so that's pretty awesome to hear. Since John kind of forced you into crypto, have you taken an interest at all?
Yeah, I have. It's a tricky one for me, and the reason it's tricky is because I think it's unstoppable. I do. But at the same time, I'm in an industry that is probably more resistant to crypto than any other, than many other sort of industries. Publishing is very conservative, and I don't mean that from a political sense. I just mean in terms of change. and they've got their established methods, which is 6 monthly accounting, and you have to wait forever for money. And, I'm not the first to say that. It's a pain in the ass. The last person to get paid is the author, and I'm the guy that's writing the books and doing all the work and out there doing the promo. So aspects of that model that I don't agree with. There are people out there now who are going down the route of publishing on blockchain books, self-publishing. I'm into that. And I'm into it for the simple reason that, I feel that by doing that, publishing your book outside normal channels and getting paid for it when it's sold in real time, I think that is a much more acceptable way of doing business. So there have been approaches to me since this to do various things involving crypto, involving books in the future. And all of this is right at the tip of the spear in terms of publishing, because nobody's really doing it at the moment. And obviously it would be, to do it for somebody like me, somebody who's worked with traditional publishers, would be a bit of a statement. And I'm not really sure whether it would be me burning bridges. I don't know that yet, but all I would say is that I'm very open to the idea, because, the idea that somebody goes online, clicks on a title that they want, and you're paid immediately for it, just seems to make a lot more sense to me. Obviously I'm aware of the blockchain transactions, how they work and all that kind of stuff. I just don't see it going any other way. And I think publishing will be dragged that way. And I would like to think that I could be ahead of it a little bit and maybe kind of dip my feet in it before, it's a case of everyone's doing it, I might as well too. I'd like to maybe do something revolutionary when it comes to that kind of thing. Not revolutionary, that sounds grand, but maybe something a bit brave.
Cool. Do you have any professional writing plans for the near future?
What, new books?
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm always writing. In fact, McAfee was one of 4 titles that I had to finish in 2020. I am in the midst of another project, which is very political and pretty divisive. And I can't say much more about it than that. Anyone that wants to know about it can follow me on Twitter. I'll drop the odd sort of breadcrumb about it. But yeah, I mean, having been in sort of music, rock star sort of world and sports and stuff like that, I found myself being sucked into politics, sort of real life, not really true crime, but just stuff that's at the cutting edge. And I think that's where I probably will be heading from now on. Not to say that there aren't music books out there. If some XYZ musician came up to me and said, you want to ghostwrite my book, I might do it. But I think I'm more interested in real life stuff, and I'm more interested in sort of making statements and doing stuff that actually matters a bit more. That's the way I'm going. And I think, for the next couple of years, that's the kind of world I'm going to be in.
Well, that's good to hear, because that's where my interest lies. So I'm grateful to be following you now on Twitter and make this connection with you.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm going to thank you for coming on to my podcast. If you don't have any questions or comments for me, maybe you can just let us know where to follow you and learn more. Yeah,
I mean, 100%. I really appreciate it. I enjoy your stuff and your crypto. Crypto is the world I want to get into. So, just like anything, if you want to get into a world, you follow the people who are into it. So I will be sort of avidly following your podcast. Anyone that wants to kind of follow what I'm doing, I'm at Twitter, Mark Eglinton. Can't always promise it will be particularly PC. Can't always promise that I won't just come up with some just fucking horrendous takes now and again. Might delete them, might leave them up, but what you will get from me is honesty. I'll back what I say, and I'd like to think that if I've got some interesting projects coming down the line, I'll keep people posted. Not only that, with the McAfee stuff, as I alluded to, there might be some interesting stuff coming down the line that's kind of a spin-off. Obviously there's the movie. I don't know if people know that there's a documentary and a movie coming on the back of this book. They've both been optioned. That's exciting. But in terms of giveaways and stuff, I'll always be doing that kind of thing. So not talking myself up too much, but I'd like to think I'm a reasonable follower. So there you go. Okay, and what's your Twitter handle? At Mark Eglinton. Just Mark Eglinton. Mark Eglinton. Yep. Awesome, man. Okay, go follow Mark Eglinton. Mark, thanks again for coming on to the Having Report podcast. Thanks very much. Cheers. Cheers.
Thank you all for listening to the Halving Report podcast. Please like and subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, check out our show notes below for more about our guests and some sweet crypto coupons, and we'll see you back next time.